Hello and welcome to our public event, a conversation between artist Jenny Holzer and Tate Modern's director Frances Morris. My name is Sandra Sikorova. I'm the curator of public programs here and delighted to introduce this evening, which coincides with the forthcoming opening of Jenny Holzer's Artist Rooms display here at Tate Modern, which will be on level 4 East in the Blavatnik building. I'm losing the voice already. Jenny Holzer is an American artist renowned for thought-provoking, text-based installations that incorporate diverse media and a pioneering use of electronic technologies. The display, which opens next Monday, 23rd of July, and which will be up for almost a year, presents key works from across Holzer's 40-year career. In terms of the format of this evening, we'll have Frances and Jenny in conversation for about an hour or so. And after that, we'll open the floor to questions. And as we're recording the event, can I please ask you to turn your phones to silent mode and also wait for the microphone before you ask a question. And we aim to conclude here just before 8 o'clock. Now I'll hand over to Frances Morris, Tate Modern's director, to say a few introductory words before launching into the conversation. So please join me in welcoming our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you so much, Jenny Holzer, the legend, for being here with us tonight. And I can see from people's T-shirts that we have a few fans in the audience, and I think we're all fans of Jenny's. Jenny was born in 1950 and hit New York in 1976. And I hope at some point this evening she'll tell us a little bit about those years before she hit New York. But after studying at the Whitney Independent Study Program, you began making work on the street pretty soon. And Jenny's first work was anonymous, and I want to talk to her about the transition from anonymity to the persona that she is today. But one of the interesting things, I suppose, about her career is we think of Jenny as somebody who's grabbed the latest technology, and her connection with media is so powerful. But there's a kind of another arc within her work, I think, which is about your engagement with art history and monumental stonemasonry and bones, and there's sort of something else going on about history alongside something about the present. So I'm intrigued to have this opportunity to talk to you and delve a little bit deeper into your work. Jenny's Artist Rooms opens, I think, a week today. I've been up there this afternoon. It's a kind of capsule retrospective. It's really beautiful. You're frowning. Jenny frowns a lot. But kind of every stage of the career is beautifully encapsulated with one or two quite significant works. And you follow in the footsteps of Bruce Nauman in that space. And prior to that, there was Louise Bourgeois. I think they would both be proud to have you in that space. And I think you might be proud to follow them in that space. Yes.
I should be so lucky.
OK, good. So we will begin. So, oh, there it is. There it is. OK, so tell us what this is, Jenny.
This is maybe the first official public art. I had practiced before doing very lame things, such as putting breadcrumbs out for pigeons to make them eat shapes. That was not a success. Although the pigeons loved me. When I went to New York, I was quitting being a painter because I was a miserable abstract painter and I wanted to have content. I briefly wrote on my paintings. That was almost as bad as the pigeon feed. But then I came to, at least for decades, pretty much losing the visuals and concentrating on text.
Okay.
Once I had text, I realized I was not a poet. I certainly was not a novelist. But I thought, oh, maybe I can make posters.
OK. But let's just roll back in time. You were painting, abstract painting. Was that what everybody was doing as a student at that time, in the kind of wake of, great American abstract painting?
Well, I had studied liberal art, so I wasn't even a derivative painter.
You're a painter from the heart.
Something.
A kind of Agnes Martin.
Would that were true. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to be an abstract painter. I had, even though I had a lousy art history education, I knew about Rothko. I wanted the sublime. My hand-eye coordination was not yielding the sublime, so I thought, well, maybe I can write and type things.
Okay, so upstairs in the artist room, which those of you who come and see it next week will be intrigued to see, are a series of very, very small drawings in a vitrine that I think predate even these works. And they're drawings of strange diagrams. Some look scientific, others look just like crazy diagrams, and they all have little text captions. Where do they fit in?
Post-pigeon, but before the truisms posters.
I want to know about the pigeon. Just tell us about the pigeon first. Was it the pigeon that took you into public space?
A flock of them, yeah. Passenger pigeons, apparently. Yeah, I was still in the image and text mode. I was reluctant to lose images, so even though I finally got into art school at Rhode Island School of Design, right, I would sneak off for comfort to the library at Brown University and look at lots and lots of books with diagrams, and then because I tend to caption diagrams, because I tend to punish myself, I made myself redraw them by hand, and I made hundreds of them, from ones about theoretical physics to psychology to medical things to the aforementioned crackpot drawings.
I like the crackpot drawings. But was that with an idea of just like kind of like a how to spend my time scenario, or did you know where you were going with that?
I knew very little. I didn't want to think it was only art therapy. I wasn't sure about that. I was curious. I was curious how people combined visuals and meaning, how one could represent content to people.
So when you came to New York, it was the text that emerged.
I, like many of the Whitney Independent Studio study program, suffered from Ron Clark's reading list, which was enormously long and incredibly difficult. One could say impenetrable. So I got maybe 2/3 of the way through it and then started writing one-liners and self-defense.
Okay. And was then putting those out on the street an extension of that self-defense? Was there, I mean, it feels a sort of like an act of protest to put it out there. Were you protesting against the art school? What was that doing, putting the stuff out there?
Well, with the diagrams, I never really figured out what to do with them. Once I had them, I put them in a box and then brought them here, I don't know how many years later. But with the truisms, when they were done and when I figured out that they would be less chaotic when I alphabetized them, it's like, oh, how can I keep this from being a strange personal activity? Yeah. And I thought, I'll put them on the street, because at this stage I wasn't even sure I was an artist. I was thinking of Speaker's Corner. Not that I knew much about it, but I knew it existed. So
those kind of tactics of getting out there, the anonymity, that was about kind of speaking without having a, that sounds a contradiction in terms, without having a voice, but speaking, the anonymity was important.
That was key for me, because I was unsure of myself, and I also didn't want the content to be rejected, perhaps because it was just one 20-something female's output. I wanted people to focus on the content and not on the author, so I put them all around in as many places as possible.
But the content is very significant, isn't it? Because it's nonsensical is the wrong word, but it's contradictory. It's taking you to one place, then takes you to another. It destabilizes you.
Maybe because I was 20-something, I thought, okay, I'm going to make a survey of belief. So I tried to write to many, many different subjects from multiple points of view. And then after I assembled them, I was afraid it was too chaotic, and that's where the ABCD came in. So.
And were you interested in people's responses?
It is very good to work on the street, because then you get quite honest responses. In this case, too much unmentionable.
Too much shit. I just said it. So at that time, you were part of a group called Collab, short for collaboration.
Collaborative projects.
Okay.
I was very lucky to meet this group of artists shortly after moving to New York. Everybody pretty much wanted to work in the street because his or her content made more sense for a general audience than an art audience. So there we went, outdoors, and we also organized any number of exhibitions in abandoned buildings. New York was full of abandoned buildings, so that's where artists came in.
But so, it may seem like a terribly obvious question, but why did you feel you needed to speak to a general audience rather than to an art audience? What was it about that moment in time that made the general public more urgent as a subject to address than...
Well, part was because I still wasn't sure I was an artist. I thought I might be one of those crackpots whose diagrams I copied.
Okay.
And I thought the subject matter, perhaps of use to people, it was to me as I tried to decide what I actually think on any number of subjects. So I wanted to proffer it, not to impose it, but to offer it to people in case sorting through would at least maybe instill some kind of tolerance.
Were you interested in a conversation with people?
No,
this was more preachy.
I stayed in the dark.
Yeah. Well, you stayed on the soapbox.
No, in the shadows.
Well, at this point, I mean, that you've always been seen as one of that generation, pictures generation, Barbara Cougar, Louise Lauria. What were they up to at that time? Are you, at this moment, beginning to feel you're part of a generation?
They were the indoorsy ones. I was outdoorsy.
Right.
I was more, although I'm older than with Keith Haring and the graffiti artist A1 and Lee and Lady Pink.
Yep.
I was more of that.
Right.
Tribe.
What about feminism and all that?
I was so lucky to meet and know about Nancy Sparrow.
Oh.
Knowing her alone was life-saving.
Right.
Not to be too dramatic, but...
In what way? What was it about Nancy that was so sort of magnifying?
How about the torture of women?
Right, okay.
Succinct.
So she taught you? I mean, you learnt...
Her work did.
Yeah.
And watching her work, despite all of the difficulties that she had, you know, she was not well, and she plowed through.
So the survival thing also maybe relates to her.
She kept going, and when, you know, her hands wouldn't work anymore, she went to the stamping and so on, so she was impossible to stop.
Like you. So initially these began as single posters, and then they began to spread. Is that right?
Yeah. The truisms were collected on single posters initially, but then I went to the inflammatory essays. I went from one-liners to 100 words.
And they're more didactic, is that right?
They were based on manifestos and similar, from the Communist Manifesto to the American Anarchist, back to the crackpots who always have good things. So I wrote in that mode. To be able to write, I imagined myself as many different people. It's much easier that way when one really isn't a writer.
So you were writing these in the kind of style of, or with the spirit of. You put your, you know, your beret on or your cap on or whatever, and became a revolutionary of a particular disposition.
Tried to.
Kind of a fantasy life.
It was. And the posters were also meant to be a caution. Bless people who think that they can save things, and curse people who murder millions in the course of imposing their will.
Yeah.
That was the topic.
Yeah, okay. And then after that, you moved to making plaques.
I toned it down after the inflammatory essays, and I thought it would be interesting to use an official format. So I went to bronze plaques that typically are what is used to show where Lafayette slept when he was helping with the revolution and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long sort of history in your work of language related to commemoration and Is that the beginning of that, the sort of idea that you, the plaque has, these are temporary, aren't they? They're things that people put up and paste and tear down in the street. But you turn those lines into bronze and you have a very different kind of relationship with the street and the place.
I like how the medium can be the message or can fight against it. I thought it interesting to use ephemeral things that are torn apart like the essays were, and then go to bronze that is meant to be permanent and is meant to be official. It's the serious stuff. Yeah.
And somehow maybe you discover a bronze plaque in a different way to the way you discover a poster. You think it's there forever.
You think it's credible, and then haha.
Yeah, that's right. Arno. What was Arno? 1996. Another text series, but very different?
That is a big jump ahead. It started as a text for a fundraiser for Red Hot and Dance, an AIDS charity. And then we ended up projecting it, the first light projection, across the Arno River. And it came to be about love and loss. Losing anyone you love from AIDS or another reason, and what you do afterwards, how you remember.
Okay, so maybe that takes us a little bit ahead of the game. Around this time, you also started working with real graffiti. And we have a number of graffiti paintings that you made in collaboration with Lady Pink in the show.
Yep.
How did that come about? From collab to real collaboration?
A number of us were working in the streets, and we saw one another and knew one another, and I very much admired Lady Pink, who was intrepid, mildly put. And I wanted to work with her.
But tell me one thing, did you work with her on the street? So working with her was bringing her into a studio and taking
Barely.
Well, okay, what was your studio like?
Funky.
Funky. Give us a vivid description of it.
No.
Where was it?
On the Lower East Side.
Okay, Lower East.
So
okay,
that's
right.
where things were happening.
Yeah.
She would come in, and sometimes she would tell me of an image that she was thinking about. She specialized in female superheroines. And sometimes I would give her a text and see what that would trigger.
But you mean how she would respond to it?
Yeah, yeah. And
okay.
so we would go back and forth, and eventually some paintings came about with the text lettered by a third woman, the artist Leone
Right. Okay.
who also worked in the streets in a different way. She would, she was an experienced sign painter, and she would hang things on street signs.
Okay, so that's a very nice three-way collaboration. But is that the first time you came back to painting after you'd kind of given it up prior to the Pigeon and Crumb installation?
I was glad that she did it. For the longest time, I was afraid to do anything with my hands, maybe because I wanted to. That was off limits.
So it was from your point of view, it was a no-touch type of collaboration.
But I was glad it was happening. I could at least smell the paint,
Oh, I kind of somehow imagined that you'd be there with a spray can doing a little bit on the side. No.
Nope, I was the mop-up crew.
Okay. And was it an interesting experience for them?
I hope it was.
Yeah.
Pink and I have stayed friendly.
Yeah, but you haven't collaborated since?
Once in a while we'll do a painting. Not very frequently, but I think we still like one another.
Excellent. So this is important. Tell us about what we're looking at now.
We've gone all the way to 1982 or something.
We've got a whole
time travel. This was interesting because I was still working with posters and thinking about the plaques, but this was a big jump to going to an official format that has had the news there and grotesque advertising. So
okay, so for an artist who's just like getting up in the middle of the night, going out on the streets, pasting their posters, working with a graffiti artist in their not studio, this is a huge jump. How did this happen? Did somebody find you? Were you propelled to an early, a reputation? Were you showing in galleries? This wasn't anonymous, was it?
Not such a huge jump, because one of the people who started this was a fellow collab member named Jane Dixon, who worked there.
Right.
So it was kind of natural to ease in, and she worked with many things in Times Square. Her imagery is all Times Square. So it's like, hi, Jane, let's go.
Let's go, let's do it. Yeah. So did people know who Jenny Holzer was?
No.
Okay, but they did after this.
That's the good news, yeah. We had to sign this one, but subsequently, when I put things up, I pretty much don't have my name. It's better, again, if people just look at that and go, huh.
But of course, now they see this, they'll say, huh, Jenny Holzer.
Not so many.
It's the power of the brand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And were you thinking about other artists who'd used, I mean, this is it's a powerful public space and means of address, isn't it?
Being a morbid child, I thought of this relative to the war news that I would see in newsreels in the 50s after the Second World War. Right. That was when I fixed on this place. So that was there, and is another reason why I went right to it when I had the invitation. Yeah. I thought, oh, this is where people look about tough things and about things that would be better if they didn't happen again, but tend to. So
you were speaking, you were saying important things.
Yeah, love wars and other things.
Some with some irony, I imagine. Deadpan is a phrase I would use sometimes in relation to your phrases. Yeah? Deadpan? So, okay, so 82, we were only in 77 a few minutes ago.
Yeah, no, we're
rushing
leaping
forward.
Tall buildings, yeah.
Okay, so what happened? Another one?
This
is fantastic.
Yeah. The plaques, the aforementioned, yeah.
And these were still going on at the time?
Yeah, these would go up. Lady Pink, yay, Lady Pink.
And T-shirts?
T-shirt, yeah.
Lady Pink painting. Okay.
One of them will be upstairs. Well, that one. What am I saying?
And this one?
And that one. And yet another one that you don't
These
see.
are fantastic paintings. When did you first show these? I mean, they haven't been... They're not so visible in your career.
They're not around that much.
Yeah.
I don't even know that three have been to... No, Philomena, you had some.
Yeah, tell us about this.
Loose more text. During and after the war in the former Yugoslavia, I, like so many people, was astonished by the programmatic rape and torture of women and little girls and a few men. So after the invitation by the Süddeutsche Zeitung to do something for their magazine, I finally came up with writing from 3 points of view: that of the victim, that of the perpetrator, to maybe understand a little bit about what could motivate somebody, and that of an observer, someone like a UN observer who would come afterwards and try to see what could be done to restore order and even life. So this was the thesis sentence, if you will.
Right. I mean, you've spoken about how difficult you have found writing at times. What was it like writing from the point of view of victim and torturer?
My shoulders move. Miserable, but you know, what is my discomfort compared to what was happening to these people? It was worth trying to inhabit various victims, perpetrators, and observers to, well, first, as I tried to do, understand a little something, and then offer it back up to people.
Why are you so hardwired to, when we live in an age where so many people are so insistent about what they believe and feel, it feels that you're hardwired to always want to put different positions, opposing positions?
I think it's more accurate to offer a wealth of material from different perspectives. I think it's closer to true. What you then do with all of those warring things is another matter.
Does that mean you don't stand in judgment?
Oh, I'm certainly clear that the rape and torture of women in the former Yugoslavia or anywhere else is a very bad thing.
Yeah, okay. Just to clarify.
Yeah, and to help that along, on the cover of the Süddeutsche Zeitung, we printed the text in ink made from blood.
Wow.
So.
Okay.
So you had to touch it.
And from blood to bones.
Yep. I usually don't go to human bones, but again, this was so serious and so awful that I didn't only want to represent it in text, or for that matter, blood ink. I thought I would carefully position these bones on weathered tables, and on them were little silver rings with the text, again, from the points of view of perpetrator and victim.
I think you can
observer.
just see the little text there. So those texts are taken from your...
From the series, and they were there, and some people would pick them up, some not.
So this is the first time you really, very significantly detoured from your work principally in text and print.
Yeah, the two, something that was, well, literally biological.
I mean, was it that you felt so, so drawn to the material and the horror that you had to move outside your kind of comfort zone to deal with it?
I tend to retreat to geometry, and geometry wasn't adequate for representing this.
Right, okay. And where were the bones from?
Various people sell bones. Yeah. It's that in and of itself is shocking.
Yeah. So where were these shown for the first time?
I don't recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good that not everybody remembers everything. So then in the end of the 80s, in quick succession, you had a show at Deer, which is this kind of, iconic American art center. You had a show at the Guggenheim. You had a show in Berlin. And you had the Venice Biennale. And you had a baby.
Boom.
Or boom, 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 boom. Yeah. And that must have been an extraordinary period for you.
It was exciting and miserable in equal measure.
Yes.
It's the true story. Yeah.
At the same time, or did you flip backwards and forwards?
Quick vacillation, sometimes
Yeah.
misery and excitement and, fear and, all that stuff.
Yeah. And what was most exciting about suddenly having these extraordinary buildings to work with?
To have a chance to work is in and of itself exciting and frightening. Yeah. You hit on something, to have access to these wonderful spaces, starting with Richard Gluckman's wonderful minimalist work with the Dia building. He did it just right, no more, no less than required. And then to have the enormous puzzle of this building that doesn't really like art all that much. And, the little booths tend to look like a bad fair, right? And it's just good. It doesn't need much. So after any number of trips, I realized that the only way I could survive would be to go with it. So that I did, going round and round.
Now, I didn't see the show, but did you use the booths as well?
No.
Okay, so it was just wrapping around the central core.
And some benches for recovery.
Before and after, maybe.
Yeah. There was a little motion sickness issue.
So that was the Venice when you won the Golden Lion. So that was pretty huge at the time.
It was nice because I was the first woman to represent the United States with a solo show. Other women had participated wonderfully, but that was part of the fear. It's like, oh, if I am awful, I don't want people to think, It's the girl problem.
If I am awful,
yeah.
honestly.
So.
I think you suffer from imposter syndrome. But I mean, this is really working for serious art museums. You're a long way from the street graffiti.
But going back to the woman thing,
yeah.
It was pretty live because some of the critics would say things like, Miss Smarty gave a party and no one came, or if they had to pick a woman, it should be this, this, or that one.
Yeah.
That's not...
I know, we shouldn't underplay.
That's not tiny.
No, it was big. You know? It was huge.
So, those guys...
Still is to a degree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I suppose that this kind of work denoted was the kind of relentless move of scale and ambition, and space suddenly became a big thing for you. And work was no longer flat on the wall, but you were using architecture, and then actually working against architecture. And well, that's another. Oh, look, more benches. Another Guggenheim.
Yeah, when in doubt, line things up. You know, I was kind of scared by all that curviness, so then I had to put a bunch of little rectangles and lines.
You never get away from the grid.
Yeah.
Berlin, Neue National Gallery.
Another tremendously challenging and wonderful building. It's almost a perfect building, I think. And when you study it for a long time, you realize how perfectly he aligned things. There just aren't mistakes in there. And it was interesting that it was done toward the end of his life, too.
Yeah.
So again, like with the Guggenheim in New York, it's like, what can I possibly do so I'm not greased by this building? As with the Guggenheim, I went to the dominant elements here, which are the 13 beams in the ceiling. So I lit those and let the glass take it away.
It's interesting because you go for the bits that most artists would be terrified of touching.
I'd be terrified not to use them because those are the strong parts. And I want to see if I can join them and not defile the building, because these buildings are marvels. They're miracles, but then again, I don't want to be completely done in.
Yeah. Well, later on we're going to see a few pictures of Blenheim, and I think another conquest, the most recent conquest. Where is that? Do you remember?
It's in France, in Bordeaux, in a warehouse, a former warehouse. Paris.
So now this is a piece that's now coming out of the wall and occupying the space.
Yeah, I'm a sculptor now.
What did you think of yourself as a sculptor by this stage?
I realized that I wasn't for the longest time, and I thought, you know, the 3D thing kind of matters, you know, and I should at least try. And since the light was inhabiting space and showing interiors as things, as objects almost, I thought I could at least crisscross in a corner.
Now, look, what are we looking at in terms of the texts now by this stage? Are you still writing these texts?
Absolutely not.
So,
I have standards.
I love your texts. Why did you stop writing texts?
I wanted to have better content on more subjects with more range of emotion, with more styles even, if you will. And I realized that I couldn't muster it, but if I went to poet friends and others, prose writers, that I could have a great range of content. This happened about the same time when I was starting to be asked to make memorials.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it wasn't right for me to write for people who needed to be memorialized. I should use their text. So that's where text from outside came in.
So where did you do your research for those texts?
I rely on people who are brighter than I am, and I read compulsively.
Okay. I think the second part is probably more true than the first part. Yeah. But you've always been a reader of poetry?
No, I didn't like poetry. I thought it was weird and scary, and you know, made you cry and stuff like that. So.
So what stage did you get friendly with it?
When I made friends with a poet.
Okay.
The American writer Henri Cole. We were oddballs at the American Academy in Berlin, and we didn't know much about Star Wars, so we talked about poetry.
And what did you take from him from that? Because you've worked with his texts, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked with his text. I've been lucky to be able to present them as here. And he introduced me to wonderful poets such as Szymborska and the work of Anna Sweer, and on and on and on.
When you're working with a poet, say, for example, in a space like this, does the choice of the poem and text precede the idea for its formal realization?
It's back and forth.
Back and forth.
Sometimes I find a poem and I go, oh, you know. Other times I'll have a shape in mind.
And then
then I'll go begging. Say, please, kind sir.
Do you always ask?
Oh yeah.
You don't get away with a quotation? No. Okay.
No.
So do you see that as another form of collaboration?
I hope it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
nice.
they certainly can say no, and some do.
But
they have standards.
when you think of your, I mean, I'm never sure with your texts whether they are. I know they are written because we're reading them, but are they written words or spoken words? You know, do you want us to speak them in our heads, shout them aloud, or is there a difference?
I'd leave that to the participants, but I know that for me to be able to write them, I often have, since again I'm not really a writer, I have to say them, and in the process of that, sometimes pare things down or know that it doesn't sound right.
Yeah. No, they feel spoken to me somehow.
Yeah.
I think we've just got a series of.
Mr.
We've
Cole,
got
7 World Trade Center in New York. This maybe was the only relatively happy text series I've done because the building was redone, well, made after 9/11.
Right.
And so properly, the people building it wanted something that was about renewal, that was about optimism. And so we went all the way back to accounts of early explorers going, oh, yon Manhattan is cute looking, to people moving to New York to begin their real lives, architects and poets and artists, like, oh, I know if I can get here, my true life can begin.
So, dare I say, I'm quite surprised that they approached you for a message of hope. But it's fantastic that you found one. Was it interesting working on with a more positive?
It was a mistake of theirs, but it was a good stretch for me, and I liked it.
Yeah, good. A period of smiling and happiness.
Liberty, but tombs.
Tombs. There's always a dark side.
My kid took that picture. It's her fault.
She would.
Yeah.
She'd lived through those early years. Yeah. Have we got pictures of benches here? I mean, can we pause and talk about benches a little bit?
There's some coming up.
Okay. Let's go on through this then.
Let's get past transcendence, right?
You can never get past transcendence.
This is inside a sign array. When I was trying to be sculptural, I made some that you could actually go inside and get toasted. Or stand outside.
But these really are sculptural. Were you thinking of the great sculptors of the past?
I was thinking of Tatlin in his tower.
There you go.
I thought this was another way of broadcasting.
Yeah, but hugely ambitious, no?
Or derivative. The Whitney. This was a nice exercise in showing interior spaces with colored air. I like making colored air. I mentioned Naumann earlier. Of course, how do you situate your work in relation to Bruce Naumann's? I always liked him because he would make almost anything, it seemed. He would work as needed across media and across emotions too, from funny to darkly funny to dead serious to philosophical. Yeah. What a man.
I often think of good boy, bad boy when I'm thinking about your work, the kind of like, contradiction in terms and, But also with the corridors and squeezing people through and that sort of thing is coming through in your work at this stage.
Must be some aggression there.
There must be. Good boy, bad boy.
a floor, LED floor.
Beautiful.
Another LED floor.
So now you're taking on the water as well.
I
The
like water,
atmosphere.
I like glass, I like the illusion of infinity. Thank you, water and glass.
Where is that?
Texas, Fort Worth. Ondo building that is rumored to be twice the size it was meant to be, that there was some mistake in the plans. I like that as a Texas myth.
They doubled it.
Yeah, I thought, yeah, Texas.
And this?
Hong Kong.
So you're a
Also
globetrotter by
sculpture.
now. What date is this?
That's, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay, so we're getting up to date.
Yeah, we're getting there. That's only a year and a half or 2 years ago. Ibiza, this is my, I finally can wiggle like Rebecca Horn, if not as well.
You've been waiting all your life for
it's
this.
like-
Who else do
but
you...
be threatening at the same time.
Yes. Yes. Is there a barrier around this work?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Nope.
Terrifying.
Should I hint? This
Yes.
is upstairs, but yet different.
And marvellous. So, okay, since it's upstairs, they're very, technologically now, these are very sophisticated. They're
Enormously.
incredibly complex.
Oh, yes.
How extraordinary. Have you just, it feels like you have a huge appetite for every new kind of
And pain.
media innovation, but is it like that, or do you just want to seize on whatever's the newest way of speaking to the people?
I like the developments with LEDs. It's reassuring that they've been chosen to be architectural lighting and automobile headlights. It means they'll be around for a while. I like the programming now that's possible with them. We do everything from the font work to the backgrounds to the pace. That's can keep you busy indefinitely, which I like to be. I'm trying to be less of a geezer and do some things with apps and do some things with drones and live feed and so on. If I get there, I'll be glad.
Will you do virtual reality?
Yeah.
You've done it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not very well, but like, you know.
You're doing drones.
Check. Yeah, I'm practicing. I'm practicing.
So is there an innovation in technology that you're chasing that we don't know about yet? And how ahead of the game are you?
I'm not even ahead. I'm trailing, but I think we might be able to integrate some things for some public projects. We're hoping for World AIDS Day, for example, to use some LED trucks to go round and round New York City and then have a drone capturing video of it and then have a live feed and then maybe get that into Times Square.
Okay.
So that's good simulcasting and you know, maybe even into handhelds as well. We're also going to try some version of that for International Day of the Girl Child. So,
oh, great.
Yeah, man.
Okay.
So,
maybe that can beam globally.
I hope so.
Excellent. Okay, so this is interesting, the sort of very newest technology and ancient bones.
Yeah,
But there's a very prosaic reason for this, I understand.
This thing is a ram. It goes in and out of the wall, and we didn't want it to ram any people, so we put off-putting bones around it. And more seriously, the text is a number of poems, consist of a number of poems by the Polish poet Anna Swear, who as a very young woman in World War II was part of the resistance and also volunteered as a nurse.
She was a nurse, yeah.
And it took her decades to be able to write the poems about this time when mass death was the norm for her. But she did, and her daughter has been kind enough to lend them to me. So the bones are, I don't think, gratuitous. I think they are appropriate somehow.
When did you discover her poetry?
Henri Cole told me to look at her.
Okay.
I first knew her love poems, which are extraordinary too, because she's no fainting violet, as you might imagine with her background.
Yeah.
Yeah, scary love poems are good. Yeah. This was the first projection in Florence with the Arno text, what came to be the Arno text that started as the AIDS fundraiser text, and then came the a text about losing someone.
Was AIDS the first big moment when you got very emotionally drawn into the work?
Oh, that's a longer story and maybe not a
now.
Public one, but it was a tremendously sad and frightening time in New York in the early 80s because people didn't know what it was. People were starting to become very ill and die suddenly. And
they were your generation?
Yeah, they were.
It was people you'd been at
group,
school with?
People in collaborative projects died of AIDS. It was right there. I was a waitress in a restaurant in Soho. In a small restaurant, 2 of my coworkers died of AIDS in quick succession.
So again, for you, you had to respond to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing thing. It's not like it's gone.
No. How important is it to you that? How important is the site of the work? We talked about the themes, the times, what's going on in the world, but how important is that you situate your work in a particular place?
For the projections, it's enormously important. Here, maybe you can tell from the photograph that having the text reflected in the water and going across the river in a horizontal plane, rising and then coming back towards you backwards, wrong reading, mirrored, and having the content broken by the wind on the water, that was appropriate for an AIDS text. That was right.
But this was going back to film. This was using film, which in many ways is a much older, softer technology than the LEDs.
The projectors that I use are film projectors, but I've stayed with them compared to digital projection, for example, because it's much harder rather than softer. The digital edge is kind of fuzzy and I think a bit icky unless you want it, where these are crisp and brighter and let us do more with architecture and let us have water be black mirrors.
So that must have been an incredibly exciting moment to upscale good in this way.
Well, to find something new, and I had rejected beauty because I was a cruddy painter, but to have it come back in an unexpected way, courtesy of the site and the water, I was happy to have beauty back in town.
But you had beauty in your words, in the words. No, it wasn't the same beauty.
No, I like.
You want visual beauty.
Kind. I like this kind. Yeah.
We all like this kind. And look at that, Rio. Yeah.
Yeah, Rio on the waves. We were projecting on the big rocks, but then a little storm came, and with it, waves in the harbor. So we had enough sense to turn the projectors to the waves, and they would rise and fall and make phrasing in the text. And again, if you can't really write, if you can have the waves make phrasing, that's good stuff.
Another kind of collaboration.
Yeah. Take it where you can get it. Yeah, that's what we were doing, and then we thought, okay, waves. So we had hard and soft. Venice again.
Okay. I'm going to whiz through some of these because it's kind of
we've been,
a world tour.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And this must be over, right?
You've never done Tate Modern? The Louvre?
And water being friendly again.
Like that.
The moon coming to to look. A bad one. Oh, look.
Just round the corner. Which beach is that?
That's the Pacific, outside of La Jolla. Szymborska again, yeah. Rather laconic, but tragic laconic, yeah? Jelinek. Some Rome.
Guggenheim again. Back to the Guggenheim. Bit of movement.
Yeah, the projections moved. Key to say.
You've never thought of working with music?
I have the worst tin ear. I would if I could, but I can't.
Okay, good answer. Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
Szymborska was there to see her text, so what an honor to have
fantastic.
Her there.
Yeah.
She's merry and very smart.
And now closer to home. So this is 1 year ago, and yes. This is the project in Blenheim.
See, this will be over, I swear. This is black mondo grass in the planters outside of Blenheim. We used extant planters and made some new ones. We wanted a little clue as you approach the palace. Something was a little off because the grass is black.
So why did you want to disturb Blenheim? What was the, did you come up with an overarching idea for what you were going to do?
It took me a long, long time.
Yeah.
There was much skulking and fretting and retooling and repenting and all of that.
You were looking for the big idea?
Any idea. Many ideas.
No, I mean, seriously, when you get somebody writes to you and says, would dear Ms. Holzer, we'd like to invite you to make a project with us. Your first thought?
Well, one day I looked at it, I said, oh, that is a palace. Uh-oh. A palace with a history, noble and sad, all rolled into one.
Yep.
So I, as with other projects with architecture, I wanted to honor the site, but also potentially add something.
Yeah.
Be true to the site. In this case, talking war.
It's interesting the way you put it like that, because I sometimes think of your work in contexts like this as sort of a form of institutional critique, but it's not really. You're kind of working with the building and its history.
I try either.
Yeah. Yes. So what was the grand plan? What was the grand narrative with Blenheim?
Well, quiet on the outside, just with the little clues of the Black Mondo. Then you would enter the Great Hall, and then channeling Rebecca Horn again. Here was a wiggly sign, again sort of threatening, axe in the ceiling E. It would spin sometimes. It had tough text. We were lucky to have Anna Sweer again. Also content from Save the Children and Human Rights Watch.
That's interesting.
From a number of poets who had to run from where they were and were writing away from home. And possibly most importantly, or certainly critically, from text from former British military men and women from the Not Forgotten Association.
Yep.
People who'd been wounded.
So that was there was a very deliberate attempt on your part to kind of respond to a British context.
Yes.
Yeah, and to the kind of tragic everydayness of now. It wasn't just about history, it was also very much about what's happening in the world.
It was about the real heroics and sacrifice of people and the grievous harm to soldiers and civilians.
Yeah. What did it mean to you to do it in, you know, this, it feels like, it's interesting, I imagine we'll stop finishing on Blenheim. I know we've got one more project afterwards, but it's a long journey from those, you know, Lower East Side streets.
From scummy street posters.
Did you ever imagine when you were starting out?
No.
No. And how does that feel?
Confusing?
Yeah. And who was the audience at Blenheim? Blenheim is
One of the
here.
perpetrators is here. It's weirdly not utterly unlike working in the street. There is a general audience, a very general public that who goes through, some of whom were not amused to find this.
Interesting. Yes.
Complained to
sort
me
of sacrilegious.
about, well, that, you know, they came to see a nice place. Yeah.
And you'd abused it, abuse of power.
Something like that.
Yeah. The benches?
These benches, some of them are upstairs. They were first in a circle in the Great Hall so that you would have the ominous wiggly sign and then these benches to greet you after you pass the Mondo grass.
Can you just pause and tell us when you started to make benches and why you started to make benches? Because when you did, it was not a natural, I mean, it wasn't an obvious thing to do to start working in marble with all its historical associations, I suppose, apart from the fact that it kind of references a type of street furniture.
I started with ugly black granite, so maybe that helped. I went to benches when I first started coming in off the street and began doing gallery shows. I thought with all this reading that I'm asking people to do, I should at least provide seating. So I thought, okay, if I'm providing seating, oh, maybe it could have text on it.
You could sit on the text.
And I was interested in how, as we touched on before, text carved in stone is very different from text flashing in electronic signs.
Yeah, okay. So benches?
Electronic signs around the first Duke.
And paintings?
Yep.
So the first paintings, the early pre-graduate paintings we've talked about, then Lady Pink paintings, and then a long time before these paintings.
Yeah.
These came after 9/11?
Yeah, I, as so many people was like, what just happened and what's going to happen, courtesy of the invasion of Iraq. I still don't understand the invasion of Iraq, so I went to a number of archives to find first-person, first-hand material about the planning of the war and the execution of it, and went to sources from officers to enlisted men to detainees to politicians, went across the board as best as I could.
So I can understand the research that you were doing then. What was it about the information that you found that led to painting being the right way to manifest your discoveries?
As you've heard a few times here already, I'll start with something and then there's what do I do with this? And I thought, oh, here's content, something I wanted in paintings, and I at least know some people who can paint, so I'd put them together because here we have nice streakiness and grievously sad material about people being murdered. So that let me paint again.
And you speak about them quite dispassionately, but I do remember a conversation with you a number of years ago when you were really, really caught up in the knowledge that you were discovering about abuses of power and you know, with the classified information, and you were very, very keen to get that out there and acknowledged beyond the art world.
Yeah, I started trying to inform myself, and then when I read, and my group and I read literally thousands and thousands of pages, you know, we came across documents, list of torture techniques, for example, and I thought people might want to know about those, or might not want to know about this.
But it seemed at the time as if just painting them wasn't enough, that you also wanted journalists to write about them and them to be on the front pages of... I mean, I suppose my question is about, is art as a form of activism, is it enough?
Well, people at least have conservation techniques for paintings and try to preserve paintings, so I'm not being completely flip. I thought, okay, I'm going to paint some of these things, and maybe this will pull them out of the archive and people will see them, and people won't toss them away like you'd toss a newspaper.
Yeah. So it's a kind of way of projecting them.
Yeah. And we also projected a number of the documents. We projected documents relative to the war in Iraq on the library at New York University. We projected them on the library at George Washington University in DC. And that, not incidentally, is the home of the National Security Archive, an organization that makes any number of requests for declassified or for formerly classified material and contextualizes it and sends it back out again.
Did anybody notice?
Yeah, a lot of people thought it was fake, which was prodigiously
Isn't that
annoying.
brilliant?
Yeah, but it was the real stuff.
Fake news.
Yeah. There's a painting.
So this sort of thing must have really, really irritated some of the visitors. Yes?
No doubt.
In the way? And captivated others.
And it was just said, this is how a number of people were made to kneel in the snow until one died, and they were innocent. And that's one of my dreadful watercolors, a new occupation. I am a dreadful watercolor maker, but proud of it.
So finally...
Yeah, I'm finally...
Finally, you've gone back to your roots.
Yep, I'm a bad painter again.
Is there nothing else you can do but return?
I don't know. Keep going. Yeah, we weren't allowed to hang anything, so we just would lean things against the mantles. Bones again. A lot of glass cabinets. One of the guards said to me, "This place is built on bones."
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really...
This was, in a way, the main piece. What I like about it is it doesn't really exist except for light.
And the texts?
From the Not Forgotten Association, from Swear, from a number of exiled poets, Human Rights Watch, Save the Children, and probably something I'm forgetting.
And you had nap?
We had a wyvern, the local animal, the winged creature flying around the long library, wanted something for people who live on their handhelds.
Right, yeah. Fantastic project. Well, fantastic is the wrong word, but yeah. AIDS Memorial? AIDS
Memorial in New York.
Yeah.
A good friend and I took the poem that my good friend Henri Cole recommended, Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. We edited it and put it on the floor of this memorial.
Beautiful. Where is this?
It's across from the former St. Vincent's Hospital where so many people died, in the village.
Yeah.
Abu Dhabi?
because I want to open up to questions in a minute. We might skip over quickly Abu Dhabi, but I could say why.
And I want to break for a minute anyway before we go to questions. Let's
okay,
do that.
Fine.
Yeah, let's finish up the visuals, and then you guys are going to talk to us, right? Yep. I'm running for the exit there, too. Oh.
These are your crappy drawings?
These are my crummy watercolors on declassified documents, you know. If you're unsure of your hand, make sure that the content is there.
So now you know where Jenny's going. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Drippy.
But again, on top secret documents, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, formerly.
Formerly.
The little Eve Klein blue.
Oh, is this your hand for the first time? And
been a long time, yeah. Kind of zippy, right?
Mm.
Yet sad. Right.
Always sad.
And then the truck.
Almost always sad.
Yeah.
And then finally, and we just thought we'd end on a couple of images of Jenny's most recent project, which is around gun crime, which looks amazing.
This is after the school shooting at Parkland in Florida. A couple of weeks later, we mustered this text and put it on a number of trucks going around the country. So I'm going to duck out for a second. You're going to look at that, and I'll be right back.
If anybody else would like a comfort break, we have a couple of minutes. You can think of what questions to ask Jenny. There are so many. Yeah. Fantastic. Mm. Hmm? Look at this. Amazing. Welcome back, Jenny Holzer. So, thank you for returning. I momentarily thought you'd done a runner. It's great you're back. And we have a question from Louisa Buck.
Hello. We touched briefly on one of your permanent projects, the AIDS Memorial, but I wanted to ask you about a couple of the other ones that you've done very recently. One here in the UK, the American Embassy, and also again for Abu Dhabi as well, the Louvre Abu Dhabi. And just first of all, why you chose to do those particular projects, and also the text that you selected for each of them would be interesting for you to talk about if you could.
Possibly the most interesting text we had for Abu Dhabi was a creation myth that seemed appropriate, perhaps an ancient creation myth for a museum that was born in idealism about cross-cultural things and new beginnings and ancient antecedents and so on. It was interesting trying to find the right one because I guess the very early gods were quite frisky. Friskier than is acceptable in museums. But we did find one that was lovely and lyrical and all about, behold, here are all new and wondrous things and they are good. So maybe a little like Seven World Trade, that was different for me, to have something that happy is not the right word, but soothing, and it's not unlike the one good day of 500 bad ones in art making when you go, oh, that's not bad. This is new. I never saw that before, and it's good. Sorry, that's a long rambling answer.
But from a permanent point of view too, because these things are not going to be projected up and then vanish. They're going to be there, for as long as the building's going to be there. So I guess that's a different mindset, perhaps, when you select texts for these buildings that are going to be there in perpetuity rather than vanish with the flick of a switch, as it were, or projector.
It's a little close to sea level, so some of the creation myth might be a little soggy at some point. But of course, it's very different to have things carved in stone. And in the case of Abu Dhabi, what was a little clay tablet, a two-sided clay tablet, had to be enlarged to fit and so on. So there's a whole constellation of things that went with that. About the embassy, the result is very simple and quiet, just a few text. But the process, I think, was not uninteresting. We asked any number of students, American and British, about how one might get along with another country, with another person, with another enemy, and ask them about what is most important to think about when you're trying to do just that. So, again, a very quiet project, but I think what was behind it was perhaps a worthwhile activity.
And one that will then change and obviously get very specific relevance over time, like now, for example.
And it was interesting to go back to the RFK quote, for example, as compared to so much of what's around today, which is either hate speech or dopey, to have someone speaking, as far as I can tell, sincerely about making things better. I thought that wasn't such a bad thing to recall and to represent.
The Abu Dhabi situation, I mean, obviously the building unfolded against a great deal of controversy. Did you ever wonder at any point that you might consider not doing the project for Abu Dhabi because of the Gulf labour and the general kind of upheaval about the conditions of the workers that were building it? But then I mean, do you consider the building itself in that way when you take on a project, or is that a separate issue?
I thought about it seriously. I thought on balance it was worth doing. I don't know if I'm right. I waited and proceeded.
Thank you.
It's a stunning building, that much I'm sure about.
That much it is, absolutely.
Yeah.
Lots more questions. You choose.
I was wondering, do you think there's a point in work with words and also with serious tragedies where beauty eclipses meaning? Like, with your work with the rape of women in Yugoslavia, the bones are, like, imposing in their ugliness, and it makes it impossible to ignore. But with something like the AIDS projections in Venice, they are beautiful in their own right without necessarily forcing the consideration of the text or the meaning behind it. Do you think it's possible that beauty can be distracting and make tragedies more digestible rather than drawing attention to them?
I think it can work either way. I think what you detail is a hazard if the loveliness eclipses the tragedy. But maybe this is old street artists talking, but when things are lovely or at least exciting visually, that can also draw people to a subject. Another thing to consider carefully is to try to match the material to the appropriate emotion. And again, not to presume to tell anybody what the appropriate emotion is, but if something's very sad, like losing someone to AIDS, that maybe it's lyrical, but not to the point of putting somebody into a blissed out escapist, what have you. I would say there's danger on the other side too. If things only were human bones in dreadful rows, that can have people be repelled and turn off. So I think there are hazards on both sides.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you.
Can you pass the microphone down? Thank you.
I really want to follow on from what Louisa was talking about on the embassy project, because I went to get my emergency passport and saw that work. And of course, it's on the American floor. So I was confused in a way that only American citizens who are on that floor are going to get to see it, or am I wrong?
I don't know about the American floor.
So it's installed it's installed where you get your, as an American, it's on a special American floor.
Oh.
So when I saw it, I wondered, and going in confrontation with this and with the whole Trump scenario and what's going on at the moment, whether you felt happy about having that work within an embassy which he himself had said no to or distance himself from. So there's a lot of questions mixed up.
I'm glad to be any place he isn't.
Question. Yeah. But then you're in Blenheim, and then he was at the bank. You know, there's a lot of overlap with politics at the moment, and I'm just wondering how you feel as an American citizen with what's going on in America.
Oh, aghast, demoralized, and, you know,
Good
a whole
question.
host of other scared, you know, disgusted, on it goes. At the embassy, it was meant to be on balance, inspiring, friendly, you know.
It was an amazing work. I just thought how sad that only we could see it, as opposed to people waiting for their visas who weren't going to get to see it, which seemed
good point.
Ridiculous
I didn't know. I'm glad you're telling
when
me.
I visited it. But anyway, on to next.
We'll get that drone flying, and then we'll get that.
Thank you. Your works are really interesting in terms of, I don't know if you think about if you would ever identify as an activist yourself, but like especially in terms of praxis and what you're talking about. And it never, even though a lot of phrases get really catchy and almost become trite with how frequently they're used, and they lose that political power that they once had, your works never really seem to in the same way. And I think that's really powerful, how you kind of have that command over language. And I was wondering if the tools that you used, do you think like other people, even activists, not even artists, can kind of adopt a similar methodology for like the same kind of success in terms of like activist spaces and even within the public sphere?
Interesting question. It was, I think, really good practice writing cliches. It might sound contradictory, but a real cliche has taken sometimes hundreds of years to be distilled and reduced. And I found that when I was writing those hundreds of fake cliches, that I would sometimes have it 3 sentences long and then shrink, 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 and then finally get there. Maybe that's why some of them have lasted, because there's no flub on them.
No, I think that's really good.
Maybe following on from that then, I wondered if you were aware, or if you are aware of the Not Surprised movement, which has appropriated your use, abuse of power comes as no surprise, which has been used here to really, has really shaken up the art world here in talking about sexist, racist and exploitative practices. I wondered how you felt about that, and maybe a question for you as well, Francis, what you think this means, that this is still an incredibly relevant statement now that has galvanized this whole movement.
I was glad that people asked me if they could have it. I was, I'm honored. Please take it, run with it, use it. There's work to be done.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't think so much has changed.
Not enough, anyway.
Sadly, yeah.
Yeah.
Pass the mic back. Along. You can come back.
I just wanted to ask about the projections on the buildings. A lot of them are shown at night, is that right?
It only works at
night.
night.
Only works at night, yeah. So I'm wondering, so how that affects that is obviously considered when you show them, that people are viewing them at that time of day. Is that part of it? Or it just would change, I guess, how a viewer would look at it when it's at night, that's quite
There are a number of considerations related. We've learned to do the projections where people are assembled anyway. They're naturally there. That canyon outside of Monterrey, Mexico was one such thing. The campground in Arcachon, there were many, many people there, you know, having had their hot dogs and waiting for something to do. So we would provide a surprise there. And this sometimes helps have people focus on the content because they're surprised to have anything there, much less a poem or what have you. It can be scary at night sometimes. We try to keep safety in mind. The best ones the ones that have worked the best will have any number of strangers standing close together, quietly reading and not being afraid. Those are the best moments.
So I guess instead, because a lot of work in the public sphere tends to be that you sort of come across it as a, you know, just as a pedestrian or something. So that's not really, was not always the intention for these works, I guess, because it's more staged in a sense?
No, almost all, for all of them, most of the audience is not invited, has no idea that they're going to be there, and go, well, like with the street posters, what's that? Who said that? To what end? You know.
Why?
Yeah, why? yeah.
And Blenheim Palace as well, because would that have been open to the public at night, you know, when they're shown? Oh, it is. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, hi. I'd like to ask you about the use of fonts and typefaces in your work.
Bless you.
I realise that I guess some of the sort of LED displays used to have standard fonts, and obviously that sort of thing is now changing. But I mean, do you design the fonts, or are they collaborative in the sense that you choose fonts that have been designed by graphic designers, and how, in a similar way to choosing the texts, how do you make those decisions?
I briefly was a crummy typesetter, just like I was a crummy painter, so I knew a little bit about fonts for my serious work with the direct marketing news and the laundry news, you know, the apex of my font life. I had to think of things for the early projections about what literally is legible when, you know, the wind would ripple the water, or a building's Baroque facade would break up the text. So I quickly returned to Futura Bold, a friend of poster days. But then if I was projecting in 2 languages simultaneously, I might have a serif font for the Italian and you know, the Futura for the English. Yes, I have collaborated with various designers and animation experts on the new signs. We make the fonts, we make the effects, we cook from scratch, you know?
I think also sometimes it's about the viewer's perception and the appropriateness or the expectation of what a font is, whether it's serif or sans serif, and whether it's a somber message or something more.
It can go from pragmatics, workman-like decisions like, oh, you're not going to be able to read it if it's not a simple font that's bright enough, to what you're saying, more nuanced decisions about this is a venerable text and so it would look stupid in a sans font, or this one has me weep, so I shouldn't use a grotesque goth font, you know. So yeah, lots of yeah.
You mentioned that sometimes you've got texts of English and, say, Italian side by side. But sometimes I've seen that you use English, say, in a Roman context, yes? And of course, English is the dominant language, yes? How do you view translation? How do you go about using English in foreign places?
It's tricky and probably impossible to do absolutely correctly, because it's not only where the projection is, it can be, for example, the language in which the poem or the prose was written. You know, should we privilege the native language? Should we privilege the original language for the poem? Should we have the local language as well as 2 or 3 others for tourists? I'm never sure, but we try.
I guess social media now could be used in the same way that billboards and posters were used for news and advertisements. Do you feel like art could be used successfully in this way, or what do you feel about art in like the post-internet age?
This is when I feel my age because I don't dwell. I have been grateful that there's some fake stuff. You know, there's Jenny Holzer mom and Jenny Holzer cat, and you know, and so that stuff bounces around. But I need a brain transplant to give you a good answer, much less to build my practice in this area. Better you tell me.
I was just wondering, it looks to me from the outside that your work becomes slightly more political and starts quite personal. I was wondering if you see it. Sorry. I was wondering if you see it that way, or if you see that it's always been political, or always been personal, or totally entangled. Can you separate from you and kind of maybe the tragedy that you're looking at?
It's inevitably some combination of the two. Sometimes one is greater, larger than the other. Sometimes I can and must and need to objectify things, at least enough to make the work. Other times it's, I mean, not to be melodramatic, you know, straight from within, but that's when it's good to be a disciplined professional so that after you've melted, exploded, whatever, that then you can have it take form, a proper form, and hopefully be accessible and perhaps useful to somebody else.
Can we have one last question?
Okay. I want to ask you about your artistic process. I mean, the process of production and execution, in a way in which I feel your works have a lot of control in them, and from the selection of the text and to the flow of text, especially in LED screens where they're multiplied in space and they're kind of made into sculptural forms. But on the other hand, I'm curious to hear about, like, because you have an extensive body of work, and I feel there are a lot of threads that have been crossing, and one of the things that we have seen tonight is the emergence, or kind of like the presence of bones coming into the installations and making a mark. Would you identify some threads that have been crossing through your practice? And would you also say there are still unknowns that, I mean, like, how is this intuitive method and control play a role in the way you produce works?
Ooh, that's a good big one. That's a good kickoff question. I hope there are still some surprises. That's the delight of art making, or I suppose of any creative enterprise, that something will appear one day and you'll go, oh, my goodness. For me, it's necessary and useful to completely lose it at times and then restructure. Other times I am too afraid to proceed unless I have everything boxed, you know, and then I can lose it. That's not a complete answer, but I think it goes to a bit of what you were asking. Yeah, so yeah, here's to rigid geometry, complete control, concentrating on production values only, and then drizzling watercolors and weeping, you know, hey.
Jenny, we are out of time, but I want to thank you for your useful work. I've learned a new word tonight. I love it. It's flub. I don't know what it means, but I'm going to use it from now on. And you know,
it's a noun and a verb.
It's a gift. Yeah. Thank you for giving us such generosity and openness and intimacy and dare I say it, you know, entertainment. You are absolutely fantastic. Join me in thanking Jenny Holzer.
done.